Hi there. Hi, my name is Brent Mangus, and I am a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. Jesus has given me the strength to recover from codependency, low self esteem, depression, anger, and unforgiveness. Thanks to God's grace, I am recovering from an addiction to pornography and habitual lying. The following is how my story and God's story are actually one story that brings him glory. I was born on November 25th, 1984. On July 15th, 1990, I went to my parents and I told them that I wanted to be saved. I said the sinner's prayer and I asked Jesus to come into my heart. And I was baptized by my grandfather, who was my pastor shortly thereafter. I know all of this because it was recorded in my father's Bible and because I actually have a picture of my grandfather baptizing me. When I was in the fourth grade, my mom was my teacher. School just wasn't my strong point. My older brother and sister were straight A students. I was more B's than A's student. Memorizing vocabulary words and their definitions was by far one of my weak points. I would get spanked for performing poorly in school, so I reverted to cheating to get good tests and quiz scores. I devised a plan to cheat on my spelling and vocabulary tests, but I was caught by my mom. Oh, the fear and the shame that I felt. My parents were so upset. I was paddled in front of my class by my father, and I received a 0 on the test. But this didn't stop me from cheating. I found other ways. And looking back on it now, I expended a lot of mental energy on creative ways of cheating. And maybe if I had used that time and energy actually studying, I very well could have been a straight A student. Somewhere around ages 10 or 11, my dad had accused me of something. And my response to this accusation was the truth, but my dad didn't believe me. I remember getting spanked and grounded for whatever the incident was, and I thought to myself, well, if I'm just going to get in trouble for telling the truth anyway, then I'll just tell him what he wants to hear, whether it's the truth or not. And this is what I now see as me becoming a habitual liar. This was also the beginning of a very strained relationship with my father that continued into my adulthood. I attended a Christian camp for teens called The Wilds in South Carolina when I was 13. The preacher was a very dynamic preacher, and he preached a sermon on Elisha's calling to the ministry called The Man That God Uses. At the end of that sermon, I went forward and surrendered my life to full-time ministry. The Sunday after we got home, we were given the opportunity to go on stage at the church and share with the church what God had taught us. I announced to the church my commitment to the ministry. And I looked back at my pastor, who again was my grandfather, and I saw tears in his eyes and a smile on his face. He was truly proud of me. Unfortunately, my grandfather passed away just a year later. Somewhere during my sophomore year of high school, a preacher came to my Christian school to preach a chapel service. He challenged us to surrender our lives to God and to make a difference in our school. He challenged us to be thermostats, not thermometers. 3 of my friends and I made a pact that day to live righteous and pure lives. All but one of us are living for the Lord and active in ministry. Around the age of 14, I went to my neighbor's house. This neighbor was the one that babysat me and my siblings since we were all 6 weeks old. She had an open door policy for us. We would hang out there and play video games, watch TV, eat junk food. She was like our adopted grandmother. One day, I was rummaging through a cabinet and I came across a stack of Playboy magazines. I looked through one and I was so scared that I put it back and left the house. I thought for sure that I would be struck by lightning for seeing such images. But I didn't die, and curiosity had been awakened. I went back the next day and I found them. Then I experienced a feeling in my body that I had never felt before, and I was hooked. Eventually, I became more curious and started searching for it on the internet. I knew it was wrong, but the bodily feelings and the experiences that I had far outweighed my guilt and shame. because it was all so new to me. The following summer, I went back to Christian camp, and all week long, the preacher preached about Samson and how his compromising lifestyle led to his failure. I went forward and confessed my sins of pornography. I confessed to my father too when I got home, but rather than try to help me, he withdrew, and our relationship became even more strained. My confession to the sin really was just a temporary relief, and off and on until I was 28 years old, I dabbled with pornography, but never again confessed it until I confessed it to my wife in 2013. I graduated college in May 2006, and I moved to Maine, where my future father-in-law was a pastor. He asked me to move to Maine, and he would hire me on as his part-time youth pastor. I took him up on this offer, and I moved to Maine. This was a perfect plan for me. It got me 1,000 miles away from my dad, again, who I had that strained relationship with, and from my legalistic, rules-oriented church. It was over the next 7 years that I eventually moved away from being such a legalistic, rule-oriented, performance-oriented Christian. I became a father on August 10th, 2007. That was both an exciting and heart-wrenching experience. My oldest son was born not breathing, and after about 5 minutes, they revived him. He was born in a small hospital in our little town, and he had to be transported to the NICU 45 minutes away. I had to leave his mom at the hospital to go be with him. I cried and prayed for the whole 45 minutes. He was in the NICU for a week. I now have 3 children from my first marriage, and being a father has been one of the best experiences for me. It has been very revealing of what is in my heart, and it caused me to confront my anger and unforgiveness towards my own father. Though I was first exposed to pornography when I was 14, I really only looked at it on occasion. However, in January 2013, I became addicted to it. I had a job that had a lot of downtime, and I would secretly watch porn almost every night. I was living such a hypocritical life. I desired to live for God. In fact, my wife and I would read the Bible and do couples devotionals together almost every day. I would go to work determined not to look at porn. And I would even start out every shift strong by reading my Bible and other devotions. But 2 a.m., 1 or 2 a.m. would roll around, and that was when I was weakest. I would watch that filth for 1 to 2 hours, 3 to 4 times a week. I hated myself for giving in so much and so easily. On December 19, 2013, I received a call from my boss saying he wanted me to come in and talk with him. I knew for sure that someone had found out what I had been doing. My fear of getting fired and then having to tell my wife pushed me to confess it on my own terms to her that night. Then when I told her, you would have thought I stabbed her in the heart with a knife. She left to clear her mind, and when she got back an hour or so later, she told me that I needed to leave. A friend of mine, put me up in this rundown apartment. I felt like I had lost everything. About a month before my confession, I watched this movie called Home Run. It's about how an alcoholic baseball player finds healing through Celebrate Recovery. I found the name of the man in charge of the CR chapter nearest to where I lived. I wrote his name down and his number down, and I tucked it away in my wallet. In that cold and rundown apartment a month later, I found his number and I called him. He listened and told me what to expect if I was trying to stop my addiction cold turkey. He then told me to call him anytime if I was struggling. The very next night, I was reading my Bible and I was struck with the urge to masturbate. I resisted, but the more I resisted, the stronger the temptation got. I called the CR leader and he told me that I was going through the beginning stages of withdrawal and that what I was experiencing was normal. He talked to me for a while and then we hung up. The amazing thing was that by the time I hung up, the urge to sin was gone. This was one of the biggest lessons I learned in spiritual warfare and recovery. Accountability is key. Well, on the morning of December 21st, 2013, I began reading my Bible once more, and I felt led to start reading in Romans. I got to Romans chapter 2, verse 16, and I read, "The day is coming when God, through Christ Jesus, will judge everyone's secret life." This was great cause to pause. I gulped, and I continued to read. You boast about your special relationship with him. You know what God wants. You know what is right because you have been taught his law. You are convinced that you are a guide for the blind and a light for people who are lost in darkness. You think you can instruct the ignorant and teach children the ways of God. Remember, I was a youth pastor. For you are certain that God's law gives you complete knowledge and truth. Well then, if you teach others, why don't you teach yourself? You tell others not to steal, but do you steal? You say it's wrong to commit adultery, but do you commit adultery? You are so proud of knowing the law, but you dishonor God by breaking it. No wonder the scriptures say the Gentiles blaspheme the name of God because of you. A true Jew is one whose heart is right with God. And true circumcision is not merely obeying the letter of the law, rather, it is a change of heart produced by God's Spirit. And a person with a changed heart seeks praise from God and not from people. Man, every single word and verse was like God was taking a sledgehammer to my hardened heart and chipping away, trying to get to the core of my being. When I finished reading this, I fell prostrate on the ground sobbing. I repented of my sins, my pride, my blindness, my ignorance. I told God that I believed that Jesus died on the cross for my sins and that he was buried and that he rose again the third day. And I told him that I needed him to indwell me, to make me new, and to give me the power to live a victorious life for his glory. I don't know how long I stayed on the ground like that, but I was visited by God that day, and I rose up a new man. That was the moment when I went from religion to a relationship with God. Eventually, I did move back home, and there was so much more transformation to take place. I believe the next greatest place to surrender was when I was reading in John chapter 5, and Jesus asked the lame man, "Would you like to get well?" The obvious answer is yes, but the man goes off with excuses as to why he wasn't receiving healing. I stopped to meditate, and the Lord very plainly said to me, "Brent, would you like to get well?" Well, I was like, "But Lord, my wife, you see how she is. My marriage won't ever be healed until she changes too." The Lord said, "I didn't ask you about your wife or your marriage. I asked about you." I balked some more. You see, my focus was on my marriage being restored. I was still trapped in religion. Maybe if I read my Bible and if I journaled and I learned how to really pray, then God just has to bless me by healing my marriage. So I heard God ask me the question differently. This time, it came to me this way: if I don't heal your marriage, will you still love me? I started to say, "But Lord," but I was interrupted, and he said again, "My son, if I don't heal your marriage, will you still love me?" This time, I released my grip and I surrendered. I told the Lord, "Lord, even if my marriage isn't restored, I will still love you." I found that initially, giving up pornography really wasn't that hard for me. I simply removed all the methods of viewing it. I had no extra data on my phone. I quit the job I was working. I didn't have magazines. But what was harder for me to give up was the habitual lying. I had been using lying as a coping mechanism, as a way to avoid getting in trouble since I was 13 years old. I had gotten pretty good at it too. I honed the art of deception all through high school and college simply to avoid getting in trouble. And by the time I got married at 21 years old, it was a deeply rooted habit. In college, I borrowed a friend's car, even without having a driver's license of my own, and I wrecked it. And then I created a big lie to cover it up. When I got married, I would tell little lies to my wife about how I did certain chores or if I was on time to work or if I fed certain food to the children. Once I finally began my recovery journey for pornography addiction, God also began working with me regarding lying. It was a long and drawn out process. I would lie to my wife and I would never admit to it. But then I would lie and admit to it a month later. And then it became shorter and shorter, maybe 2 weeks. A week later, I admit, a day, an hour, all the way down to a minute or two. And somewhere in this process, I realized, or God allowed me to see, that I was getting an adrenaline rush or a high on how well I could lie. I was being tempted to lie about things just for the sake of lying. I finally told this to my wife and our counselor. This was a big breakthrough for me. Eventually, I was able to catch the temptation to lie at the thought level, to subject it to the obedience of the cross, and then instead to tell the truth. But the damage had been done to my marriage, and the trust was irreparable. On September 1st, 2015, I left home and I went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina for basic training. I had enlisted with the Maine Army National Guard on April 9th, 2015, just a few months before. Well, just 3 weeks before this, my then wife filed for divorce after she had entered an affair that summer. So I went to basic training with a very heavy heart, but God used my pain to minister to my fellow soldiers at basic training and also at advanced training. God allowed me to be the Protestant chapel worship leader, which then morphed into me running the entire service until the chaplain came up and preached. During the week, soldiers would ask me to pray with them and come to me for advice on their problems. God was teaching me that his call on my life to the ministry wasn't over. While in basic training and advanced training, God gave me a clear and renewed calling to the ministry, this time to become an Army chaplain. I have since been pursuing that calling wholeheartedly. One other time that I will share with you, I was freshly returned from Fort Jackson. It was a Thursday in February 2016, and I was just 2 weeks away from my divorce finalizing. I still was hoping for a miracle and a restoration of my marriage, yet I was so angry. I was struggling immensely with unforgiveness and hatred. I was losing sight of the true joy and the true peace that God had given to me. I went to my church's young adult service, and in my broken state, I just worshiped. I asked the pastor if the group would pray over me, and I explained why. That night, I had about 20 other men come forward, lay their hands on me, and pray over me. I was able to release all the anger and the unforgiveness to the Lord. Once more, I felt in my heart the arms of the Lord wrap me up, hug me, hold me, and whisper, "Be still and know that I am God." On March 8, 2016, my divorce was finalized. Yet I had the peace of God, which passes all understanding. Not long after that, on July 15, 2016, I had the great privilege of being baptized to show the world that I had entered into a relationship with Jesus. I was able to share my testimony with all those present, and the biggest blessing was that my 3 children were able to be present to witness it as well. I did find love again, and I married the love of my life in February 2017. We have a little boy together, and he was born on December 4th, 2017. God has been able to use all my heartaches and all my failures to allow me to minister to others in ways I never imagined possible. I've experienced the love of God in a very real way. My life's motto is my mess is his message. I'm witnessing the grace of God transform the mess that I made of my life and turn it into something absolutely beautiful. We named our son Josiah, which means Jehovah heals. My wife and I both thought this was a fitting name for this baby, for he is proof that our God brings healing to the brokenhearted. Celebrate Recovery is a huge part of my life now. I hate missing Thursday nights, though it does happen from time to time. Psalm 51 verses 12 through 13 says, "Restore to me the joy of your salvation and make me willing to obey you. Then I will teach your ways to rebels, and they will return to you." This passage is my ministry motivator. God rescued me and he restored me. Now I can teach rebels of his ways so that they will return to him. Since returning back to Chambersburg from the Army Chaplain School that I went away for in 2019, since returning back in December 2019, the Lord has been teaching me new areas in my life that I can apply the principles of recovery to. So over the last couple of years, I've done a lot of work on, say, my bad habit of procrastination. I've also admitted my struggles with closet eating and consistency with healthy eating. Another area that was crucial in my initial months of recovery was journaling. So I just recently took a blue chip because I want to journal consistently again. 2021 was a very big year for my family and me. I became an ordained minister. I graduated with my Master of Divinity, and I am actively seeking becoming a pastor for a local congregation, whichever one the Lord would lead us to. None of these things would be possible had it not been for Jesus bringing me healing and recovery the last 8 years of my life. If you wonder how you can pray for me, I would ask that you pray that I never deny my weaknesses, but instead that I would surrender them to the Lord. The Lord told the Apostle Paul that it was in Paul's weaknesses that he can work and move with mighty power. Pride is such a big weakness for me. And it is pride that keeps me from picking up the phone to call accountability partners. It's pride that keeps me from confessing my sins to my brothers in Christ. God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Surrender and humility go hand in hand. And I desire to always be completely surrendered to my Jesus. Thank you for letting me share.